Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the shop. If you're new around here, well, this is our 2013 Mitsubishi Fuso FG that I'm turning into an overland camper. And if you've been here for a while, you know I've been fighting with getting the engine to start. If you watched the last video, I think we found the reason why, and I'm making an attempt to fix that. You may also be a little bit confused because I took 6 injectors in to get tested. This is a 4-cylinder engine, and that's because I took 3 injectors from my spare engine and 3 injectors from this engine, and that's because number 4 is still refusing to come out. Now that I've confirmed that the injectors are no good, number 4 has to come out. As simple as that may sound on the surface, you're probably aware of the struggles I had attempting to get this out before, and if you've looked around online or experienced this before, you're probably quite aware of what can happen. Because injector number 4 is located right at the back of the engine, which is tilted down towards the back of the cab comes down, it's kind of exposed to the weather. Any rain that comes down here, road salt, moisture collects in between the 2 cams, runs to the back of the engine, and there's a little teeny tiny hole back there to let the moisture out. But there's also 4 holes where the injectors are with non-watertight seals, so moisture can also run down between the injector and the head. Being that the head is aluminum and the injectors are steel, in the presence of an electrolyte, such as salty or dirty water, we get corrosion. With those 2 metals corroding and intermingling in there, the space gets a little tight and it becomes quite difficult to pull the injector out. This can result in ripping the injector in half if you try too hard, and if you don't try hard enough, the injector doesn't come out and you have to replace the head. I do not want either of those scenarios to happen, so here's my plan. Instead of trying to rip the injector out with a sufficient amount of force to break free of the corrosion, I'm going to try the tortoise and the hare approach. I'm going to apply a smaller amount of force consistently over a much longer period of time. By this point, we all know I'm good at taking a long time to do things, right? So my intent is not to finish this today, but it is definitely to get it started. So here's what I'm going to do. Starting with my contour gauge, I'm going to create a pattern for the profile of the top of the engine. This is a super handy tool for things like this. Next, I can trace the pattern onto a piece of paper, and then match the radius of the arc to a full circle, which happens to be the same as a paint spray can. With a couple more measurements taken from the paper sketch, I can now start to create a digital version of the pattern in SketchUp. With the pattern of the engine created, I can start building a pad that can rest on top of the engine. This will spread the load over a larger area, as well as being a soft surface to prevent damage to the engine surfaces. Of course, we'll need a hole in the middle for the injector to pull through. And before I print the whole thing, I'll create and print a thin slice of it to make sure that what I measured is accurate and fits the engine perfectly. This thin slice takes much less time and material to print, so let's check for the perfect fit. It's, well, this is why we do a test piece. Snapping it in half and holding it together with vice grips gives me a new template, and after a quick adjustment and reprint, we have the perfect fitting profile. Because I want this part to be fairly strong, I'm printing it at 80% infill, which is much higher than usual, so it takes a little bit more time to print. Now that it's done, we can check it for a final fit, and of course, it fits perfectly. Clearly, that is just the base. What are we going to do for the rest? Well, we're going to make it up as we go along. Which junk pile shall we pilfer from today? Well, to start with, I've found a couple of pieces of maybe usable metal and some threaded rod, and my thought was maybe I could build a 2-sided jack that gets threaded up on the nuts to separate the 2 plates and pull the injector out. And while I'm sure that approach would work, the concern that I have with that is I'd have to get everything exactly the same going up, otherwise I'd start pulling things sideways, and I really don't want to do that. I'd have to be counting equal number of turns on each side to know that I was putting equal tension, and then it's not going to be very stable front to back because it's just balancing on two pieces of threaded rod. So next I looked at my scrap metal buckets and was wondering maybe if I took this so that it could span across, rest on the printed plastic part and have a single hole in the middle with a single screw jack pulling it up. Looking in my scrap bolt and nut and I don't know what they are bin, shelf area, I didn't really see something that I thought would be strong enough or sized properly to pull it up on one bolt in the center, and then I had another idea. I do have some really large threaded, super fine thread, big surface area hardware that I could use that I'm not using anymore. What is it? Well, you probably all have them too. It's the old wheel studs and the old wheel nuts from the back. Quite happily, I also quickly found in one of my other scrap bins a nut that's the same thread as the injector. So if I weld this nut to the old bud stud, all right, we have a surface area on the underside of the wheel nut that as we thread it down, we'll pull the whole assembly up, and we have the square on the top that we can use to prevent the whole assembly from turning. One thing I discovered as I started trying to fit this together is the window that I had made in the middle of the printed part isn't actually wide enough to get around the injector while being centered over the injector. So I just cut one side off. It won't have any impact to it. Back in the back end, we can see the plastic part spanning across where the two cams go. You can see that I've cut the back half of it out so you can see the full injector, whereas on the back side, let's see if I get this bridge piece across here is what I've cut out on the front side here. Again, not gonna have any impact. So we've got the nut threaded onto the injector with the old bud stud sitting on top of that and the wheel nut above that. You can see we've got enough room above it that we'll be able to lift quite a bit before we hit this cross brace. So what we're missing now is the piece that goes in between the underside of the wheel nut and the top of the printed plastic. Well, the remaining space happens to be just about the size of a piece of 2x2 box tube. I have this thick-walled aluminum, so I'm going to cut this to fit in that space and put a couple of holes for the center bolt to pass through. A quick cut on the bandsaw, followed by my favorite deburring tool, and then heading down into the basement to hole saw some openings. While I'm in here, I may as well toss the rusty steel parts into the ultrasonic cleaner. And while the ultrasonic cleaner is doing its magic, and since I'm in the basement, I'll draw up and print some thin washers to go between the steel lug nut and the aluminum bridge. Simple little parts like this are very quick to draw up, and these will only take a few minutes to print. While these parts print and the ultrasonic cleaner runs, I'll finish up drilling the holes. A quick dunk in WD-40 so they don't flash rust, collecting the new washers off the printer, and it's back out into the shop to wrap up the aluminum fabrication. Well, after a whole bunch more cutting and grinding and drilling, here we have an aluminum, what I'm going to call bridge. Let's go look at how it fits. The aluminum bridge is sitting on top of the printed part, and you can see there's clearance around the injector for it to move up. We've got the hole above for the pulling nut to come through. So next I'm going to weld together the two nuts that make up the section that will actually pull on the injector. That's still really hot, and here in Canada in the winter, we have an easy solution. Not hot anymore, and test fit on the injector looks like it's gonna work. Now, because I'm making this up as I go, I don't know what the easiest way is gonna be to assemble this. It may be that I put the bridge on first and then thread the puller on, but I'm gonna try threading the puller on and then slipping the bridge over top of it. Looking at this now, I don't think it's gonna work this way. because I don't have enough room above. I hope this whole assembly fits now that I've built it all. So I'm going to try assembling it loosely and then slipping it over top as one piece. Here it is, somewhat assembled. I've got the wheel nut, the two printed washers, comes down through here, and then this part threads onto the injector. Let's see if we can make it work like that. So far is much easier. Okay, so that's threading on to the injector now. And that's all the way down. We've got enough threads up at the top to still be able to thread the nut on. Ooh, I see a problem though. Now the problem that I see is my intent was that I could hold the square part of the bud nut while I turned the wheel nut. And as things have sized out, you can see there's no bud nut square sticking up above the nut. But I think what I can do is trim the conical area off the wheel nut so it comes down to about here, and that'll expose the top of the bud nut. Well, with the cone section cut off the nut, we can slip this back over top, and before I even start to thread it down, I can see that I have a section of the bud stud available, the square part. Get that threaded down, everything is snugged up, and I've realized I don't have a 41mm wrench to turn this nut, which means I'm gonna have to make one, and I'm out of time for today. But I think we get the idea that this is gonna work. You can see the gray printed piece underneath, the aluminum bridge, and the old bud stud and wheel nut that are ready to pull up on the injector. Now this has been marinating in PB Blaster for about 2 months now, but I'm gonna dose it with some more, and then I'll slowly start applying torque to that wheel nut. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. See you next time.